I thank very much the organizers for the opportunity to be here and to present this paper, which will be divided in two parts. The first one, a general theoretical introduction to AI in papyrology, and the second one, the presentation of the Udine project. So the title of my presentation is an obvious reference to Sir Eric Turner's 1933 monograph, The Papyrologist at Work, where he attempted a sort of methodological definition of what a traditional papyrologist does. Quote, "Our first task is to set out what the papyrus says and to distinguish between what is certain or given by the text and what is a matter of inference. This is the prime responsibility of the papyrologist," end of quote. This is, of course, the narrower view of papyrology as a purely philological task aimed at decoding and restoring the papyrus texts at best, which makes a papyrologist be a skilled reader or also learned copyist, as defined 1 year later by Herbert Utty in another important methodological work, The Textual Criticism of Documentary Papyri. From this standpoint, the papyrologist's purpose is to decode the ancient texts with the help of his or her knowledge and provide a careful critical transcription as a reliable source to the other scholars, to be an artificer of fact, according to another famous earlier definition provided by Utty. Precisely due to the never-ending push towards a perfect balance between the extant text and its editorial interpretation, papyrology is a discipline in flux, as defined by Anne Hanson in 2002. Restorations, reunifications of fragments, new discoveries, new readings, corrections, progress in the scholarship, not secondarily helped by the digital tools, contribute to outline a potentially ever-changing text. This is what papyri.info does through its contributors and editors. A digital text open to updates and improvements, as well as cross-connected with a complex network of surrounding metadata. From the digital viewpoint, this concept was defined meta-text by Traianos Gagos as early as 1998 at the 22nd International Congress at Florence, proceedings published in 2001. In his own words, quote, "In this new era of papyrological research, we cannot speak of a collection of papyri alone, but also of a collection of electronic files, data, metadata, and digital images," end of quote. He was speaking of the Michigan Papyrus collection, of course, but that concept can be easily exported to an idea of metapapyrus, made up of a network of electronic resources describing and preserving all its multifaceted features. His words are even more relevant today from the digital viewpoint. Quote, "An edited text is no more a static, isolated object, but a growing and changing amalgam," end of quote. This is what a digital papyrologist does today, and playing with Utty's definitions mentioned in the previous slide, we may say that a digital papyrologist could be a skilled searcher when performing critical queries in our databases, a learned encoder when checking the printed edition in order to provide a suitable digital text, and eventually an artificer of digital facts, which are precisely those metapapyri envisioned by Gagos. What happens when we turn to artificial intelligence? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, AI is defined as, quote, "the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages," end of quote. These are precisely the intellectual tasks involved in the papyrological workflow. In the digital environment described earlier, reading and publishing a papyrus is still a matter of human criticism, in terms of mental or intellectual process. For a comparatively long time, we have been recognizing and deciphering digital enhanced representations of papyrus fragments with our own eyes, typing and annotating papyrus texts with our own fingers, decoding handwritings, supplementing lacunas, and interpreting metadata with our own brains. In this regard, it's interesting, in my opinion, to read what the pioneers of digital papyrology wrote between the late 60s and the early 80s about the relationship between humans and machines in papyrology. Arthur Bodson was one of the developers of a very early attempt to create a textual database of documentary papyri at the Laboratoire d'analyse statistique de langue ancienne, LASLA, at the University of Liège in the late 60s. And he concluded his presentation of such a resource at the 12th International Congress, Ann Arbor, 1968, with these words, which I will read in English because my French is not very well. The role of the papyrologist is reduced at this stage to asking questions. The laboratory is there to find the means to answer. Then comes the work of reflection on the documents provided. But this is no longer within our competence. Machines can help specialists in their research by rapidly providing them with reliable data. They are incapable of solving the real problems. We still need excellent papyrologists." End of quote. The same viewpoint was shared by Knut Kleve and Ivar Fonnes, who at the University of Oslo in the early 80s developed a computer program called lacunology that was able to perform a task of automatic gap filling by searching suitable combination of characters in a provided textual databank. I quote a passage from their presentation of the tool in Symboli Osloenses, 1981. "We want to stress that we do not in the least expect that sometime the scholar shall be replaced by the computer. On the contrary, as far as we can see, what now happens is that the scholar gets access to new aids and has been freed from many unnecessary burdens. He has, one could say, got a sort of magic lexicon in addition to the traditional reference books. In this magic lexicon, there are endless possibilities of sorting and arranging text material in a minimum of time. But no other than the scholar is able to use that lexicon. Wilhelm Krönert once emphasized that there are three cardinal virtues for the papyrologist: Sehkraft, eyesight; Sprachgefühl, sense of language; Sachkunde, competence, expertise. These virtues are today as relevant as ever they were and can never be replaced by any computer." End of quote. Today, however, things are slightly changed from those roaring 80s. Artificial intelligence has knocked on the doors of digital papyrology. And I would like to retain Kröner's triad of Sehkraft, Sprachgefühl, and Sachkunde, recalling the mention of the areas of visual perception, speech recognition, and decision-making in the definition of AI quoted earlier, in order to survey what this means for papyrology now. If we apply these three cardinal virtues to digital papyrology, we note that the first one, Sehkraft, eyesight, has developed into digital paleography, with several tools that help human eyesight to decipher writings, to identify hands, to date papyri from their handwriting. The digital repertories of electronic pictures have evolved into platforms where the human-driven alignment of text and images can produce datasets of ancient characters capable to lay the foundations of automated deciphering. The second virtue, Sprachgefühl, sense of language, has developed into linguistic annotation, enhancing the possibility to study the language and the linguistic strategies of ancient papyrus texts on several quantitative grounds. Some attempts have been made in the past to develop a tool to automatically filling the material gaps that affect our papyri. Such a tool has now been launched for Greek epigraphy, and it would be very interesting to envision similar papyrological attempts. What about the third virtue, Sachkunde, competence, expertise? A trained, intelligent machine is expected to gain sufficient competence to be able to replace a human papyrologist in his or her primary task of being a learned copyist of a papyrus text. This, of course, requires lots of information to be taught to the machine, especially as we likely expect such a learned machine to have less doubts and more certainties than human papyrologists when analyzing a papyrus. Today, it's perhaps more convenient and less time-consuming to try to decipher a complex text in the human way than teaching a machine to do so. We can start doing so, of course, as we do, and we can learn a lot in the meanwhile. As Rodney Ast significantly remarked at the conclusion of his talk at the latest Papyrological Congress in Paris, quote, "Whether machines learn to read our papyri remains to be seen, but the process of helping them to do so can make us better papyrologists, because tighter connection between text and image allows people to study and expeditions." End of quote. This is a first positive outcome of digital papyrology in general, a closer attention to several peculiarities of our object of study, which often escape the eye's attention in traditional editions. Thus, to work at the idea of an artificial papyrological intelligence is first of all a way to improve and enhance our own papyrological intelligence. Let's turn now to the second part of my paper, the presentation of the project led by Professor Giuseppina Azzarello at the University of Udine that aims at creating a digital AI-based tool for the automated identification of scribal hands in documentary papyri and the equally automated dating of such documents on paleographical grounds. The project is conducted in the framework of the Interdepartmental Research Center, Artificial Intelligence for Cultural Heritage. The idea is to train the machine to recognize the individual features of cursive hands in order to identify papyri written by already known scribes and to date them according to the transformations of writing over time. With respect to other projects dealing with the automatic recognition of literary writings, this is particularly challenging due to the uneasy outlines of cursive hands. This is the tentative workflow of the project. The first phase will deal with the creation of the starting dataset, aimed at performing a test training of the machine on a selection of significant documents of known attribution. The second phase will expand the starting dataset with other sets of significant documents of known attribution. The third phase will apply the results to sets of documents of unknown attribution. The fourth phase will extend the framework to most of the documents precisely dated on internal grounds and grouped by similar hands. We are currently dealing with phase one, the creation of the dataset, and in particular with the preliminary step, aimed at selecting the documents that can be relevant for our purposes. Our attention is focused on homogeneous papyrus archives, since they can provide some documents written by the same individual over a comparatively short time span and are usually dated with a certain precision. For the moment, we only deal with scribal identifications that have already been ascertained, either thanks to the existence of proper autographs or based on strict paleographical comparisons. Moreover, we are interested in archives that can provide a sufficiently high number of relevant specimens, and that can be representative of the different writing phases of Greco-Roman Egypt. This table lists the biggest individual papyrus archives according to Trismegistos, sorted by the total number of known documents. So we have the archive of Zenon from Ptolemaic Philadelphia, the Dioscoros archive from Byzantine Aphrodito, the Hieronymus archive from late antique Philadelphia, the Apollonius archive from Roman Apollonopolitis Heptacomia, the Cronion archive from early Roman Teutonis, the Isidorus archive from late Roman Caranis, the Menkes archive from Ptolemaic Osiris, and the Petaus archive from Roman Ptolemais Hormuz. These are the certain autographs that can be found in the selected archives. Sorting them in the relevant order, we know 110 autographs of Dioscorus, 31 of Menkes, 24 of Zenon, 16 of Eroninus, 6 of Apollonius, and none of Isidorus and Petaus, both of which were agrammatoi, so that their personal documents were written by other people on their behalf. The case of Cronion is more complex, since the archive pertains to the Grapheion of Teutonis, of which Cronion was the head, and the contracts are written by different scribal hands. This archive will be used for the further test steps of the project. In the last part of my paper, I would like to draw your attention on the two Ptolemaic archives, Zenon and Menkes, and in particular on the second one, since my role in the project is for now to analyze and select the relevant documents from this archive. Just to introduce the main issue at stake, I show you 4 random examples from the Zenon archive. These are all letters written by Zenon, but it can be well noted how the script often varies significantly, depending, for example, on the chronology or the type of writing, more or less rapid. Some trends are clearly maintained, such as the nu with an ascending serpentine, and the eta in 2 strokes, with the first leg higher and the horizontal line prolonged before looping back and descending slightly curved to form the second leg, with more or less cursive variations. One of the main challenges for handwriting recognition will therefore be teaching the machine to recognize the basic individual trends beyond the possible contingent variations they may take on in the multiple possibilities of cursive writings. The same considerations can be made from the archive of Menkes, Como Grammateus, that is village scribe of Kirk Osiris, in the Arsinoite Nome, between 119 and 111-10 BC. The documents comprising the archive are mainly official letters and registers related to Menkes' administrative duties, land surveys, tax lists, and reports related to the productivity of the land around the village. For the purposes of this presentation, I have chosen to show you how Menkes writes his own name, in the nominative case as the sender of official letters, in the greeting formula Menkes, addressee, Hairein, and then in the genitive case as the compiler of reports and registers, in the introductory formula Paramencheius, Como Grammateus, Cerceosirios. It should be noted preliminarily that all these documents are drafts or copies of official documents sent out to the addressees. The writing is therefore generally more cursive, more personal, and less formal than a standardized chancery script. Here we have the cases in the nominative. Already at first glance, the previously described issue is noticeable. In a general trend that can be recognized as Menkes' hand, some letters are traced in very different ways from each other. Mu is almost always in 3 times. I hope you see my arrow on the screen.
Yes, we see it.
Thanks. In 3 times, with the 2 central strokes merged into a single ascending semicurve, but the ligature of the second vertical leg is sometimes at an acute angle, like here, sometimes rounded, like here. In one case, here, the 2 central strokes are well distinct. Epsilon is almost always connected to a cursive gamma by means of its central stroke, but in 2 cases, this is traced downward. In one case, upward. In one case, descending from the top of the letter, and in one case, it is detached. In short, the most consistent part is certainly the ending, eta sigma, traced in a very cursive manner, with eta taking the shape of our lowercase h, with an additional appendix linked to sigma, which is in two disconnected strokes. However, in the two later examples here, from 113 BC, the writing is steadier. The letters are traced more clearly, squared, and orderly. Note in particular the final eta sigma, which is more squared, but evidently the origin of the cursive pattern described above. So this eta then becomes cursive like this, and the sigma attached. In comparison, the name in the genitive in reports and registers is partially less cursive. Note in particular gamma, perfectly squared, created by extending the central stroke of epsilon 90 degrees downward and continuing it with a perpendicular horizontal stroke. There are attempts at ornamental serifs, like here, in rho or in he. The ligature epsilon iota is traced with a loop, like this. However, there are also examples of faster writing, with gamma, here, more similar to the nominative examples. The epsilon iota connection much simplified, sorry, I shouldn't have clicked, and the final upsilon sigma very rapid, resembling eta sigma in the previous examples. It is possible that chronological or contextual circumstances might have affected Menkes's personal style, but the analysis must be widened to all his handwriting specimens. To conclude, these are the main methodological issues encountered in the initial phase. First of all, the fragmentary and damaged state of the papyri, resulting in a relatively small number of available complete samples. Variations in the handwriting of individuals due to aging, faster or slower writing, and context. For example, better written official copies versus drafts or personal copies. To partially overcome these difficulties, it is necessary to globally consider what features define an individual hand. Certainly the ductus, that is the outline, the style, the way of shaping letters and their ligatures, but also the arrangement of text on the writing surface, including layout, pagination, and the possible presence of typical paratextual elements, symbols, abbreviations, graphic signs, as well as any personal linguistic usages, and everything that usually allows a papyrologist to recognize the imprint of a specific scribe on a text. Currently, we are exploring how to integrate all this information together for a proper evaluation of the written text by the training system. We will keep you informed about the progress of our work. In the meantime, thank you for your digital, because we are online, but I hope not artificial, attention.